discussion. Oh, I should say that we are going to record this. So if you don't want to be on camera, you can turn yourself off. Let me got it here. Anyway, basically, this is kind of a series, masterclass, TED Talks on things that maybe once people are sort of more post-Mormon, they may feel like they want to do a little catch-up on. So this was one that was kind of meaningful to me when I talked to Marty Lynn about doing one on relationships across different divides. We can go to the next slide. When I was growing up, I had one sibling, and if we were ever fighting or having a discussion in a loud voice, my mom would come in and say, "Don't be like Laman and Lemuel," right? And of course, we knew what that meant, and we would stop. So I feel like I never really learned to develop those skills where you can talk to someone who has a different opinion, healthy, I don't want to use the argument, but just healthy discussion of differences. In our family, if anything ever came to a head with differences, my mom would just say the word anyway and put her hands up like that. And that just meant you stop talking, you just stop. And so I feel for myself that that's a deficit that I have. I'm not able at work to really talk to people. If there's something different, I just kind of back off. I just kind of, internalize it. I don't do it. So this is, maybe I'm just having this whole thing for me. I don't know. But I think this is a great topic. And I wonder if a lot of people who are raised in the church think that contention, is not a positive thing, where really contention can just be a courageous discussion. We've used that word before. So we have Marty Lynn, who has done a lot of study into this and a lot of personal work on this. And she is amazing. She has a podcast called Where Will You Go at wherewillyougo.net. It is under Bill Reel's kind of umbrella of his gospel discussions. So I would encourage everybody to look that up. But I will let Marty Lynn introduce a little bit more about herself, and we're just excited that everybody's here. This is, I think, going to be a really fun series. Go ahead, Marty Lynn.
Okay, so the first thing is, well, let me tell you a little bit about ourselves. So I would say that our collapse of belief, where like things changed for us, was probably the end of 2019. And then COVID hit, was really easy for us to just kind of disappear. And then as church started back up, people didn't recognize that anything had changed for us. And we started getting called to do things for church. And so we thought, just to let people know where we were at, we thought it would be good to resign, and for a lot of other reasons. But anyway, we resigned early last year. So it's been about a year. And when I was struggling, before my belief really collapsed, one of the biggest fears I had was losing relationships. And today I feel like I can say that I haven't really lost any relationships, but I do have to admit they aren't the same. So, and this is huge. And I bolded it because I am not an expert. You can take what's useful and you can leave what's not. And I'm not trying to claim that what has worked for me is going to work for everyone. You get to decide. And that's just so important to me. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm preaching to you. I tried, when I wrote this out, to use language that is very self-reflective and not like we should do this. So, but that's really important for me for you to figure out where you're at, and then you take the next step forward, and don't try to think that I'm trying to tell you what to do, because I don't know what's best for you. You do. So anyway.
You just muted yourself.
Yeah, next slide there. Okay. So these are some of the reasons that, like, I had someone ask me once, like, why do you think it's so important? And I really didn't know how to answer it. And so I thought so I did some self-reflection. I feel like it helps me avoid echo chambers, because I feel like I on purpose stayed in echo chambers when I was a member, and that didn't help me grow. And so I feel like it helps me avoid echo chambers. I prefer rich and deep relationships over shallow and surface level relationships. I feel like I can make new friends, and I'm totally fine making new ex-Mormon friends, but I can't make a new mom or a dad or a brother, and all of my family is still in. My best friends growing up are all still in. And so, and then the other thing is, like, I really can't explain my strong desire for it. Like, it's just, I feel instinctive that it's important. So I'm trusting my intuition, and I just am going down this path. I also consider it a skill, and I feel like the more I practice, the better person I'll be. So yeah, next slide there. So this is a quote by Brene Brown. I love this book. People often silence themselves to agree or agree to disagree without fully exploring the actual nature of the disagreement for the sake of protecting the relationship and maintaining connection. But when we avoid certain conversations and never fully learn how the other person feels about all the issues, we sometimes end up making assumptions that not only, see, this is the word, perpetuate, but deepen misunderstandings, and that can generate resentment. So this is just some more backup. Like if you want true connection, sometimes you can't just be superficial in your relationships. So next slide. I read a book early on, and I was actually looking for the audiobook, Just Feeling Good by David Burns. And this is the only one that was available. And so I just read it, and it turned out to be like a relationship book. And you didn't have to, as you were reading it, he had you have someone in mind that you had a troubled relationship with. And so it wasn't even my spouse when I was reading through it. And I felt like it was super useful. The claim he makes is that there are ways that we can shift ourselves that can positively impact our relationships. I really liked his advice. It empowered me. And it wasn't always easy for me. I had to let go of my ego to see where I can improve, but it also gave me the power to improve it as well by like saying, well, if it is some my fault, then that means I can't change other people, but I can change myself. So. Oh, before we start this one, Melinda, I'm gonna just kind of, so there are 2 roadblocks that he identified. He spent 20 years trying to figure out how to help couples. I think mostly he had couples coming into his practice. And David Burns said that he identified 2 roadblocks, and one of them was, I'll let him explain it. Just go ahead and start it. Oh no, I can't hear the audio.
And so what that means in a troubled marriage, or if you're at conflict with a colleague or a friend, is that you go to the therapist, you say, oh, I'm not getting along with my sister, my mother, my spouse. And the therapist assumes, okay, well, this person wants a joyous and loving relationship. But often nothing can be further from the truth. The person doesn't really want a good relationship with the person they're complaining about. And then if the therapist tries to help that person, they will resist the treatment. That's called outcome resistance, because the person doesn't want to get close to the person they're ticked off at. And the way I bring this out about it in workshops, and we could even do the experiment with the listeners right now.
Great, let's do it.
As I say, just to bring this idea to life, imagine one person you don't like. Can you think of one person now or at any point in your life, someone you kind of deeply resent, and maybe they always have to be right, or they won't listen, or they're controlling, they can't share their feelings, they're always exploiting other people, narcissistic, and how many of you can think of someone like that? And so all the hands go up. And then I say, now let's imagine there's a magic button right on the desk in front of you. And if you press that magic button, that person who you're so ticked off at, who you so deeply resent, will instantly become your greatest friend in the whole world with no effort at all. How many of you are going to press that magic button? And then people laugh, and maybe if you've got a group of 200 in the workshop, maybe 1 or 2 hands will go up. And then I say, now notice what just happened. I just gave you the choice between a hostile, abusive, troubled relationship, a mean-spirited one, and
I was muted. I was telling you to go.
joyous, loving,
You can go ahead and go on. Sorry, there was some bad miscommunication
peaceful
there.
relationship. And what did you choose? And then it kind of dawns on people, yeah, I don't really want to get close to that person.
Okay, that's good.
And so
we could listen to this whole podcast and it would be better than me. So maybe I'll have a link to that whole thing because I thought it was good. So
the thing I began to do is
we might have to skip these ones.
Hold on, let me try something.
Why is it?
There we go.
So so he goes on and he talks about, like, do we secretly love to hate? And the way that he writes his book, and he has you go through some exercises to figure out what motives are competing with your intimate relationship with this other person that you have in mind that you seem to want to have a good relationship with. And sometimes we'd rather blame, we'd rather be right. We want to get back at them. They started it. So you have to decide, do you really want to get close to this person? And that he spends like a whole chapter at the beginning of the book really trying to get to the bottom, because you're not going to be able to get closer. You're not going to be able to do anything if you don't really want to do anything. And there's no right answer even. He even gives you a lot of options. He says you don't have to have a good relationship. You can choose to end the relationship, or you can choose to keep going as it's going, or you can choose to work on these things that can help. But there's no right answer, but you do have to be the person that decides. So next slide. There's another thing called process resistance. So he talks about that too.
Relationships. And then the second issue is called process resistance. And I ask the listeners right now, if you did want to get close to that person, what is one thing you're going to have to do that you're probably not going to want to do? In other words, what process will you have to get engaged in to make that relationship work, to make that a loving, convert that hostile relationship to a loving one? And to help people answer that question, I ask the audience, and we can ask the listeners now, who in your heart of hearts do you think is more to blame for that relationship? The person you're not getting along with, the person you don't like. Who's the bigger jerk, you or the other person? And then people
it's obviously the other person.
Exactly. So it's the other person. Put your hands up, and then 95% of the hands go up. And I say that, or 80% anyway, 80 or 90%. And then I say that's the way it is in our culture. We're always telling ourselves that it's the other person's fault, and we see ourselves as the victim. And then I say to the audience, what is the prognosis for helping a troubled relationship with helping someone who says it's the other guy's fault, it's her fault, it's his fault? And they say, yeah, the prognosis is zero. So that's the second
that's good.
kind of bridge we have to go across is
yeah, so if it's all their fault, I mean, that could be true. Maybe it is all the church's fault. Maybe it is all this other person's fault that you may be trying to have a good relationship with. But if that's the case, then the chances of you being able to do anything about it is zero. So are you willing to give up blame and pinpoint your own role and then spend your efforts on changing yourself rather than the other person? Because changing other people doesn't always work well. So next slide. So this kind of gets into, I appreciate the guy that was doing this interview on here was a great interviewer. And he basically said, like, I think it's really easy. Like, well, what if they are the person, like, what if it's not worth the relationship? Like, what if they are so difficult that it's not worth it? And anyway, this is him asking that question. So I thought it was really good.
It's like, what if the other person really, like, let's just say, okay, for the time being, David, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to take 100% of the responsibility for my side of things, and I'm just going to give that my all. At what point would I be able to say, like, actually, I've been giving this my all, and that other person really is an asshole, and I need to get out of here? Or
well, as the Buddha said 2,500 years ago, there are no assholes in the United States at this time. their assholish behavior exists. We all do that, but the question is ultimately a personal one of what are the advantages and disadvantages of working hard to make this relationship better? What are the advantages and disadvantages of getting out of the relationship? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the status quo? I always tell people, when you have a troubled relationship, that's the decision you need to make. And I'd be glad to work with you if you want to make the relationship better. And I've got some fantastic, powerful tools for doing that. But if you want to leave the relationship, I would totally support you in that decision as well. And if you want to stay in the relationship and do nothing to change it, I can accept that choice as well. But beyond that, if someone wants to make a relationship better, then I always work through specifics.
Okay, that's good.
Because one.
So yeah, so there it is. If they really are the asshole and you can't get past that, you have choices and you don't have to do anything. You can just stay and do nothing. You can leave, or you can stay and try to make it better. So, so once you get past those two barriers and you decide, yes, I am willing to work on what I can work on, he goes through different techniques to effective communication. The first one, and in that podcast, if you listen to it, he has an example that he kind of runs through all of these different things. Anyway, it would, if you're interested, you can get a little snippet. It's like an hour long, or you could read the book or listen to audiobook. So the first one is disarming. And so it's, if you've been told something, to find truth in what they say, even if it's unfair and untrue. And he bases this off the law of opposites, which is, if you defend yourself, you're proving their criticism right. So like by even engaging in an argument, you're actually giving them some ground to stand on. And so you can disarm that by finding whatever little bit of truth in what they're saying, and you grant that to them. The other one is thought empathy and feeling empathy. So thought empathy is repeating their words so that they know you got the message. And then feeling empathy is acknowledging how they probably feel. So like, I'm thinking of like my parents. We went to Thrive and they watched our kids. So I had a hard time telling them where I was going, but I wanted to be transparent, and I appreciated their willingness to help. Like I told my mom where I was going, and she was still willing to help. And I came back after Alan and Katie Mount's talk was an eye opener for me, and it made me wonder how my parents are doing. So here I am struggling in all my pain and discomfort, and I was like, I wonder how they're doing, because there is some pain on their side too. And so I came back and I just asked them how they might be feeling. And it opened up a really nice conversation. It was a really, really good conversation. And it was just a good way to get into a conversation, just asking how they're doing instead of just always wishing they would ask me how I'm doing. And then the next one is inquiry. So you ask them gentle questions about how they are feeling and thinking, and not in like a, not in a way that you're like trying to, the difference. Like you're gentle, you're like trying to really see how they're feeling. You're not trying to like trap them or anything like that. Assertiveness. So this one is really cool. I feel statements. Totally worth trying. So instead of like, this works with any kind of like, even when I'm having a fight with Kevin. So like, instead of being like, you did this and you did this, you use I feel statements. And the reasoning behind that, he talks about this in the book, is that if you use I feel statements, people can't argue with how you're feeling. They can't. I mean, if you say you did this, they can argue back, right? But if you say I'm feeling this way, it's a very powerful way to express how you are feeling in a direct way, but it's still gentle and it's still opening and it's not threatening to them, because you're not blaming them for making you feel that way. You're just telling them how you're feeling. And then stroking. He said he didn't like that word, but he couldn't find any other word to use for it. But basically, you need to convey warmth and love even when you're really struggling. And I was going to share this later, but I think this is what I did on accident. When I very first told my parents that I didn't believe anymore, a lot of church topics came up, a lot of really heavy conversations came up. And over a period of like a month or two, that's all the interactions with my dad that I had. That was it. They were all really negative. There were times where I was in tears. I was in tears at one point, and he's like, I thought you were free. You shouldn't be sad. Like, just a lot of mean things were said. I'm sure I said things too. And I was reading another book, totally unrelated, but I had this epiphany, kind of unrelated. It was like a political kind of book. It wasn't, they were talking about the gay rights movement and how that battle was won, according to the author I was reading, by drawing the circle bigger around people. So they started putting ads in New York City that were like, this is your firefighter, this is your serviceman, these are your daughters, these are your brothers. And so instead of trying to like tell people you need to accept people that are gay, they said, hey, these are your family, these are us. They drew the bigger circle. And so it made me have an epiphany that I like, what do I have in common with my dad? I need to focus on that and not what we had. We no longer have the church in common. So I can't focus my relationship on the church anymore. And so I was like, what do we have in common? And I was like, well, he's my dad and I love him. And so I was at my parents' house helping them paint a room, and he was out in the shop, and I just went outside and I gave him a hug and I gave him a kiss on the cheek, and that was it. I just left. That was all I did. And it really, really helped. And so you really do have to convey the love that you have for these people in your life as well. So anyway, next slide. So here are some common things. As I've been going through this, I have been really trying to grow up and not just flip flop. So, as a member, I remember believing that people that leave the church are deceived by Satan, that they don't have a true testimony, that they just are falling for anti-Mormon lies, that they're just lazy. And all of those things have in common, they're all dismissive. They're all dismissive of the real reasons that people leave. And I notice now being in the ex-Mormon space, and after having some time to heal and I've worked on some relationships with members, I've realized how many dismissive things I've been thinking as an ex-Mormon. Just saying, oh, you're just brainwashed. Like, that's a very dismissive thing to say when you're talking about someone who thinks that they are thinking for themselves. They believe they are doing the right thing. And then someone tells them they're just brainwashed. It's just a very dismissive statement. I have another friend that went through a faith crisis, and he was describing it to me. And as he was describing it to me, he basically said, oh, I guess you probably don't think it's a real faith crisis. And it was a true dark night of the soul. He told me all about it. And I was like, that would be very dismissive of me to say that wasn't a real faith crisis. So there are plenty of people that know all of the things and they stay, and that should be okay with me. They're just doing mental gymnastics. They're uninformed or uneducated or whatever. So as I've been trying to mend relationships, I try to not only avoid those statements, but actually not believe them anymore. Because I think beliefs are a lot deeper. Just philosophically, I think our beliefs are, we think we understand ourselves, but I don't think any of us really do. I think we're a lot more in common with people we disagree with than people than we think, I guess. And so, and then I've noticed that I've done this. So I'll get in heated debates online, which is probably dumb, but I have, so we'll start getting into it, and it gets to a point where they're bearing their testimony to me. And when that happens, I usually just tell them something like, I can tell this is very important to you. Thanks for sharing. And I wish you the best. And almost immediately they reciprocate with the exact same phrase. And they say something similar, like, I know you're just trying your best. And it diffuses when you are able to accept people for what they're actually saying they believe. It just really diffuses a lot. And I've had this epiphany before, this aha moment. It's like, I want to be supported in my decision to leave. So even though and I don't want them to be trying to save my soul. So I need to do the same thing and support them where they're at, and also not try to save their soul. And this is me. This is just thoughts that I've had. I've also learned, like, especially my adult family, like, they're big boys and girls who know how to use the internet. And when they're ready to, like, willingly expose themselves to the criticism that I feel like changes things, they'll do that, I think. Anyways, Tom, you had a comment. Go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt your mojo, your flow here.
Well, I'm at the end of a slide, so you're good.
Oh, so no, just the things you've been talking about. It just reminds me the evening that I spent with about 60 of us, and Jana Spangler, some of you know Jana, she was teaching us about space for one another. And Marty, you said something about how it seems like this is new for many people on both sides of the equation as we get into this relationship with the church in the middle. And I've experienced this with siblings where this is new for them. They've never had a brother or a sister-in-law or anything like this happen. And I've never been in this situation. And it sounds like you haven't been in this situation where you've left a church after umpteen years. So if we are thinking about one thing that we can do and strive to do, or just, and you've brought it up, you really have, it's just recognizing, even if the other person doesn't recognize it, if we can recognize it, that we need time and they need time. And they may not know it because we're better than they are. No, I'm kidding. They just don't know it, or they may know it, but it's so hard. So I'm just talking, just space is what we want. And when Jana was talking to us, it was like, we have to offer that space up to the other folks that we're interacting with. So yeah. It just made me think about that, because this is all new in many different ways for many of us. It sounds like for you too.
Yes.
So I hear you.
Yes, we're all stumbling and learning together. For sure. Yeah, I can go ahead and flip it, or not flip it. The flip is on there, so I had to say flip. So another Brene Brown quote, people are hard to hate close up, move in. And that is so true. You would be surprised. You think you know what other people can handle. But when you move in, it's amazing how much people are willing to accept you. I have my whole first episode of my podcast is just talking about how I don't feel like, for a time, I'm learning that I belong anywhere, but for a long time, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I didn't belong in the church. I didn't belong out of the church. I politically leaned conservative. So as many of us know, the ex-Mormon space is very left-leaning. And so I was like, well, maybe I got to keep my political views to myself because people aren't going to accept me. And I couldn't be more wrong. Generally, if you're just not an asshole about it, people are very willing to be close to you. And it matters less than I thought, I guess. So, and all of these are great. Speak truth to bullshit. Like, I don't think you have to stay in a room if someone's saying something you don't like, but you can be civil about disagreement. You don't have to be a jerk about it. Holding hands with strangers, kind of similar to that first one. Strong back, soft heart, or soft front, wild heart. So, standing, I think you can think what you think. That's what strong back means to me. Soft front means I might be wrong. A wild heart, just like, be brave, be willing to learn. Anyway, her whole book is really good. I highly recommend it. Anyway, next slide. So some of the things that I've learned. So a lot of times we leave and we assume everybody that's in the church must believe the way I did. And it's because I believe I was wrong. Now they are all wrong. But a huge thing I've learned is that no two members believe the same. And it's like, I knew that while I was in there too, but it's just, I've learned it in a different level. Like there are some people that seem to have a healthier relationship with the church than I did. And I can support them in staying because of that. It's not fair for me to assume that, right, I already said that. So it's okay to give members an off-ramp too. So like, I know it doesn't feel good to be gaslit sometimes. So when they update the way they do things, it can feel like, oh, this is the way we're doing things. Therefore, that's the way we always done things. So the way you were believing is just crazy. We were having this conversation not too long ago about how some of the culture things are changing. And so for us that have been out, or at least we were expected to live a certain way and current members are not expected to live that way, you know, it can feel like, hey, you can't change it. But if the church is improving and getting better, it's okay to give them an off ramp, I think. Another thing I've learned are wise and admirable people in the church and out of the church. And there are shallow and stuck individuals in the church and out of the church. I don't think that belief is a line of good people and bad people. So, or, you know, people I can learn from. And then also I've realized that leaving the church didn't make me suddenly cure my black and white thinking. I'm an engineer. That is kind of how I am. So I'm going to have some of those same problems, even on this side of belief, or whatever I believe now. And then, yeah, I'm not suddenly wise and correct. I'm probably almost as wrong as I was before. And it didn't cure me of confirmation bias. It didn't cure me of tribalism. So here's some more books that I've read in the last couple of years. Bridges by David Osler. I consider David Osler a friend. He is doing some amazing work trying to build bridges from the faithful side. And if his book Bridges, for some reason, it was really healing to have an active member acknowledge the real reasons people leave. I don't know why, but interacting with faithful members and them being okay with where I'm at has been healing for me. He talks about in that book 5-to-1 ratio of heavy conversations to light conversations or positive interactions. And so, you know, I talk about all those heavy conversations I had with my dad. I don't think it was wrong to do that, but I think it was wrong to do that every single time I talked to my dad. And so I don't know, I think he got it from somewhere else. He was well sourced in his book, but he said a 5-to-1 ratio. I think it was 5-to-1. I might even be wrong, might be 7-to-1. But anyway, have the heavy conversations, deepen those relationships has been my kind of goal, but to also have positive interactions that aren't heavy in between. And it seems to be working okay. And honestly, sometimes I just avoid them altogether because I'm not ready for them. But how to have impossible conversations, that's more politically written, but I think it relates. There's this quote in there: beliefs matter because people act on their beliefs. So whether they're true or not, and it's far easier to be wrong than right. So, I mean, even there's something I'm probably believing now that's probably wrong as well. So even if you don't believe what they're believing, to see it from their perspective is sometimes important if you're trying to have a conversation with them. I really love The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. It kind of gets you out of the thinking I'm right, they're wrong, and just kind of explains that different personalities kind of lean certain ways in their beliefs. It's also more politically written, I think, but just going to read this quote. If you really want to change someone's mind on a moral or political matter, you need to see things from that person's angle as well as your own. And if you do truly see it from the other person's point of view, deeply intuitively, you might even find your own mind deepening or your own mind opening in response. Empathy is an antidote to righteousness, although it's very difficult to empathize across a moral divide. And so 2 things there I want to emphasize is that if you're sometimes you get into like these books and you're like, it's justifying where you're at. And you forget this line right here. You might even find your own mind opening in response. So, and I think that's why it's so difficult to empathize across the moral divide, is because you want to use these tools to help change them to think more like you, but you're really unwilling to correct your own thinking if you're wrong on something. Anyway, next slide. Timing. I think that I don't know what the formula is. I'm just trying to figure this out because, like, I'm an engineer. I want to know the right thing to do, the very exact right thing to do. And this has been hard for me to just realize that it's a case by case basis. It's a person to person thing. It's a timing thing, like Tom was saying, timing. I don't know what it is. There are ups and downs in my life. I thought I was doing really great with my dad, and he sent me this text just out of the blue, and it crushed me. And I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. So yeah, there are definitely ups and downs. And yeah, I think sometimes we do have to set boundaries, and that's okay. You have to take care of yourself. But I also don't think they have to be permanent. I was talking about this in a podcast with a friend, and we were talking about the same problem, like me trying to figure out what the exact rules are, right? And anyway, that's something I've kind of thought about, is I don't think they're permanent, because sometimes you have to take care of yourself for a time, and then maybe you can heal a little bit more and then revisit things. I don't know, maybe. So I feel like as I've grown, definitely feel like I've grown, and I can expose myself to more believing topics and settings than I could a year ago. We went to a niece's baptism, and I was able to look at it like kind of symbolically, and it really wasn't that hard. I was able to look at it as a family gathering and not as a indoctrination thing. And it was more of a sweet experience than a triggering experience. And I've also learned to reframe, like that's how I've reframed some things, is just try to see just how it metaphorically could be true or something. I don't know. Another thing I reframed. So after that experience with my parents, where I came back and asked them how they were doing, I was like, and my dad said, I'm okay. I believe you'll come back. And I know that can really bother a lot of people. And, I looked at it from his perspective, and from his perspective, the highest good is being a member of the church. And so he wants the highest good for me. And I was able to reframe that in a way that wasn't negative for me. And it didn't bother me. I was like, yeah, that's where my dad's at. My dad believes that this is the best thing for me. So it shouldn't bother me that he wants the best thing for me. Next slide. I really like this quote by David Osberger. Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. I already gave that example of how when you tell people, I can tell this is really important to you. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, let's see. This is a quote that they talk about a lot at 3 Practices, and I'll explain a little bit more what that is. But I honestly can't believe the power of just listening to somebody and leaving off the but when I disagree. And I've felt it when people have been willing to listen to me. I had one brother that came to me after we told people that we did not believe anymore, and he came and he listened, and that he just said, how is this happening? One brother that did that, and that meant a lot to me and my husband. And I realize now he was listening to me, and that's the same thing as him showing his love for me. And anyway, and I've noticed as I have been willing to listen and validate where they're at, it's almost always reciprocated in my interactions with people. Next slide, yeah. So I was talking about 3 Practices a little bit. If you're interested in practicing listening, there is it's called 3 Practices. It's 3practices.com. And they have this philosophy where they set up these rules, and based on the rules, there's really no way to argue. And the way it kind of works, it's a Zoom meeting, and there's a framing question, and they ask for a volunteer to take 2 minutes, and then other volunteers ask clarifying questions. And a ref keeps track of the time and makes sure the rules are followed. And it's interesting because basically gives people a chance to be heard, and then you can ask more questions. You can practice your curiosity and try to figure out why they think that. David Osler has kind of a sub 3 practices website called Bridges. I think it's bridgeslds.com, where they are Mormon related circles topics. And we're just barely starting. He already has like a monthly parents of ex-Mormon support circle. Like, keep this in mind, there are parents of kids who have left that are in need of support. Like, they're struggling too on their side. Like, there's just a lot of pain on both sides. I think that's why sometimes these relationships are so hard, is because there's really not a strong party to take the weight of the hardness of the relationship. So anyways, so those are some resources if you're interested in like actually practicing. Here's another example of meeting my friend where she's at. So we went on a long car ride, and we were talking about goals. We're both part of this goal program for like weight loss. And we were talking about our big why and like trying to figure out how to do these goals. And an Elder Bednar talk popped into my head that was totally related. And I was able to bring that up just to kind of support what we were saying. And then I think she was shocked that I used church stuff to support what we were talking about. And I let her know that I want to support her, where if there's something good in the church, I want to keep it. And it was a quote, I think, I'm trying to remember even what the Elder Bednar talk it was, but anyways, and she really appreciated it and opened up a beautiful conversation where she was able to ask me where I was at, because she was curious about where I was at, but she didn't feel like she could ask me because she didn't want to be nosy. So it just opened that up for her, and then we had a really nice conversation. I already said that example as well. So I think that's no, we got another one, right?
I thought so.
All right. So this is a quote that came up on my Facebook feed. I am a fan of Jordan Peterson. I know some people don't like him, but sorry, I like him. You are not obligated to associate with people who are making your life worse. So bottom line is, if you need to step away from a relationship because they're making your life worse, I mean, if you need permission to do that, here it is. But just remember, it goes both ways, because if you are doing something to them where from their perspective, you're damaging the structure of their being, they're going to want to move away from you too. So it goes both ways. So I really appreciate, we were kind of having like a pre-meeting, and Bruce brought this up, and I think this kind of goes along with, if you need to walk away because your relation, like your families aren't willing to accept you, maybe I should let Bruce, I want Bruce to do this.
Oh, okay. This is kind of one of my standard Reddit replies when people talk about losing their family or losing their church friends and stuff, because like I live, outside of Los Angeles, and the church is not a big part of anything here. And so when I was still kind of nominally a member of the church, I read a series of books called Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin. And for the gay community, he coined the term our logical family. And we also call it family of choice. And if you're partially or totally rejected by your biological family, we need to find our logical family or family of choice to partially or completely replace our biological families. And I have a very large logical family. And then, at church, sometimes when you move into a ward, you find instant friends. And when you move away from the church, a lot of time those friends go away. And so you need to find your logical or friends of choice. So it's not just your family. And I'm in the position where my parents and 2 of my 3 siblings have already died. And, I have nieces and nephews, but nobody lives within 6 hours. So I really don't have any family that I'm super close to. And so my whole family, the people that, we take each other to the hospital and are sitting there with surgeries, and, we do grocery shopping for each other when we're sick and stuff. But these are all friends. These aren't anybody that I'm related to. So.
Thanks, Bruce. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Marty Lynn. That was wonderful.
We can take some questions if you have any, or if we want to have a discussion. I'll let you finish this up real quick before people leave, though.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely amazing. Oh my goodness, you've given me so much to think about, because like I said, with my family, nobody really knows anything, and everyone in my family is moving back to live where I live. So parents, sibling, everything. And my first thought is, okay, how do I hide, right? Tonight, you've given me, not hide from them, but just hide who I am, right? Like always have a sweater in the car, make sure I wear it. If I'm wearing a shirt, that kind of thing. How do I'm already thinking I'm exhausted by what I'm now going to have to do. It was fine when they live far away. Now they're going to live close. I'm going to have to hide. But tonight, you've sort of made me think, and just at least a little glimmer, maybe that's not what I should be thinking about. How am I going to hide? Maybe I should be thinking about how am I going to interact, and maybe start a dialogue. So lots to think about. This is amazing. Just very quick before we start if we have some questions and things, our next real book club meeting is our regular time, second Sunday at 11 a.m. and it is Lost Christianities. This is an amazing book, so everybody pick it up and start reading if you haven't already. So presented by Brad. So yeah, any other questions or comments? If we have a few minutes, I didn't want to go too much over an hour because I know it's a Tuesday night, but just a wonderful, wonderful presentation, Marty Lynn. Like seriously, it gave me goosebumps the whole time. It was amazing.
Thanks.
Yay, Marty Lynn.
You got the
Yeah,
spirit,
great.
Rebecca?
Any other comments or questions or thoughts? Yes, Bruce.
I just got a question, and this may be just totally unique to my family. My family I describe as polite acquaintances. Mylene's joining us.
Oh, excellent.
But
Hi, Marlene.
Eileen.
I describe